The cold is upon us, the concrete jungle is upon us, and the UFC on ESPN era is now upon us as well. Welcome, everyone. My name is Luke Thomas, next to Danny Segura. We are here in New York City for your MMA fighting pre-fight UFC Brooklyn show. I'm not sure I got the nomenclature right. Is it UFC Brooklyn? Is it UFC on ESPN Plus?
It's all of the above, but we're going to go with UFC Brooklyn because that sounds nicer, right? UFC on ESPN Plus, one bit of a stretch.
It is a bit of a stretch. We'll go with UFC Brooklyn. It has been a highly interesting week. We have so much to get to. Let's sort of talk about the week in general, the ESPN handshake, the ESPN embrace. You've been on the ground. I have some feelings myself. I'll be honest, it's felt a little bit ordinary. I've seen a lot on television, but on the ground, you were at the press conference. I wasn't there. I was at Media Day. It didn't feel much different from our vantage point. So how are you feeling about what their relationship has been to the UFC experience thus far?
Well, the UFC controls a lot of the production, so that we know that automatically that's already gonna bring some familiarity looks into the picture. But man, everyone, including the staff, even media and fighters, they just seem happy about this. I don't know, there's something new about it that just seems fresh. It seems like a new start, and we already seen on the ESPN.com already some things being done, showcasing the UFC. So we're already starting to see some differences here and there, but for the most part, yeah, like it's still very familiar with like the UFC brand, yeah.
I have felt it on television or online for sure. In person, let's talk about that for just a second. Wasn't much media at Media Day. There was long lines to talk to Rachel Ostovich and Greg Hardy and I think Paige Vanzant as well. Some of the more familiar names, but there wasn't exactly like, I've definitely seen more for when Holly Holm fought at Barclays, and you went to the press conference. You could hear a couple of responses to TJ Dillashaw or Alex Hernandez's zings. What was the attendance like? Do you feel like, to me, it's like, okay, ESPN's doing a lot, but I don't know how responsive the fans are just yet.
Right. I mean, also, those events were during the day, so people work. I think it was like the press conference started at like 2 p.m. or something like that. But I was also there during the day when Khabib was supposed to fight Max Holloway at the Music Hall in Williamsburg, same venue, and it was packed. I think that also has to speak about this card itself. I mean, we got a fantastic main event, but once you start trickling down, there are some interesting fights there, but, it isn't like a super stacked card that we've seen in the past, like the big ones on Fox, right? So sure, we got a good card. I'm not complaining, but it's not super stacked.
I think it's a pretty good card. It just feels like an insider's card.
Yeah, that's right. It's very much for the hardcores. If you look at the fights, there's some really, really good matchups, but yeah, there isn't like sort of like the mainstream stars there.
Let's get to the results of the weigh-in, which has been on everybody's mind. Basically, everybody makes it, including the main principals, TJ Dillashaw, as well as Henry Cejudo. I saw online your coverage. You were there in person. Let's talk about how they looked for a second, then work our way backwards. How did they look?
So TJ Dillashaw shut me up. I mean, on the MMA Hour, I was telling you how I was like not confident that TJ Dillashaw would make the weight. Because let's be honest, from 135 to 125, that's about 10% of your weight. Pretty significant. Already a shredded dude that is cutting down to 135. But man, he is a pro and completely shut me up because not all the time he was saying, I'm going to make weight easier than Cejudo. Guess what? He shows up first, makes the weight. Looks good doing it. The whole fight week, high energy, right? At the workouts, he's hitting mitts, still packing power, moving a lot. I mean, Donald Cerrone didn't do the open workouts because he didn't feel so great. TJ Dillashaw was there putting in rounds. He probably worked out more than anybody. So, yeah, TJ looked fantastic. Cejudo came in later, but he had no weight issues at all. This was actually a pretty good card, no drama. Everybody made a weight, fairly easy, no need of the towel. So everybody looked great, including both TJ and Cejudo. But really, who impressed me was TJ.
Who looked, I don't know if the question is who looked better or who looked worse, but comparing how they've appeared on the scales, about the same in terms of what kind of effect it had on them?
Yeah, about the same. I mean, I would say Cejudo looked a little bigger, but he has looked a little bigger throughout fight week. And I think he's a little bit shorter too, so he's able to pack some more muscle. But as far as like composure, energy, I mean, they looked about the same. I mean, if you look at TJ, he kind of looked like he's been making flyweight his entire career. I mean, super easy.
One thing that occurs to me about TJ Dillashaw is we talked in the MMA beat about his selfishness, not as a bad thing, as the kind of thing that will propel him potentially to greatness. As I think about the challenge ahead of him on Saturday night, it's sort of occurring to me that he's taking this opportunity, yes, to get a second belt, But remember, there's another component to this conversation, which is he's looking for pound greatness. I kind of think he's saying out there, I'm not only going to make weight, I'm not only going to go drop down a weight class, I'm not only going to get a second belt, I'm going to show you just how great I really am. Do you get the sense that he's on a mission? Well, he says he's on a mission for larger significance. Can you feel that in the same way that I'm detecting it?
Oh, for sure. And something that, I picked up that I wasn't able to pick up, without covering this event, like being on there and like talking to him, seeing him in person, dude, his competitiveness bleeds through absolutely everything. Like the way, like, whenever you're put in like sometimes a certain situation, it happens a few times in life where you're either competing, it could be something silly like a game or something, and you go, yo, I'm not gonna lose to this person. Like, this is not happening.
Yeah, that's him on everything.
Literally, that's him every second. When you usually have that like a few times in your life, he's not gonna be second to none in anything he does. Like tying his shoes, anything. He just seems like he's competing the entire time. He's on that mode, and it's kind of bizarre to watch, to be honest. Like, he's always not on edge, but like always kind of ready to go, and it's super impressive. I mean.
To answer the question, though, let's say he wins. Let's say he wins in relatively impressive fashion inside the distance, let's say, right? Where does that put him pound for pound?
Honestly, he starts climbing up. I think he's setting the stage for people to start talking about him being in the pound for pound rankings, right? I don't think he's there yet. But, man, he picks up a belt. He beats Cejudo, who just beat Demetrius Johnson, a GOAT. Man, you're definitely on that platform, and everything that's come is just going to build upon it. But he's definitely on track, and he knows it. He knows he's onto something here.
What's interesting is he still has the fight to go. We'll see how the recovery looks. No one really knows, but he was talking about Max Holloway. Now, I do not want to get ahead of myself. I don't even think that's a conversation you can have until we see how things look on Saturday night. But I got to say, if he does what he says he's going to do on Saturday night, I don't know that. It's not a fight I want to see, and I do think it's kind of crazy. But this whole thing's been crazy, and he's answered the metaphorical bell every single time. Do you think it will ratchet up Max Holloway talk?
I think so, yeah. Once he gets that second belt, he's just out to get champions. And as you said on the beat, this whole champ thing is kind of getting kind of old. It's kind of getting overplayed. Everybody's a champ now. Now the real thing is who can be the champ. So that's going to be interesting for sure. And knowing TJ, his competitiveness, he can fill those gaps, right? The weight issues, everything. He can fill those gaps with his competitiveness, his edge, his mental edge. So I think potentially down the line it could be a topic, yeah.
That brings us to Henry Cejudo. He believes a victory will help preserve the flyweight division. Well, certainly you could argue that a victory won't do damage to the flyweight division. But does he have to impressively finish TJ to really keep it around? If he ekes by, remember, he beat Demetrius Johnson very narrowly. If it's the same kind of thing with TJ Dillashaw, who had to drain himself to get down here, however impressive that might have been, not a natural flyweight, is that enough?
I think every single little move matters at this point. And Joseph Benavidez said, I was talking to him, and he's like, I'm kind of, rooting for Cejudo because, and the whole flyweight division is, because it brings a little bit more security. But it doesn't say it brings the full security, just a little more. Like, Cejudo is going to have to do everything perfect. How he behaves if he gets the victory, the post-fight call-out, like everything has to be measured, everything has to be right to convince Dana. Because, unlike some other people, I do think that Dana's on the fence, and he's saying, we'll see what happens. So far, Cejudo looks like a star. He's talking like a star. Let's see if he can be a star in the cage and also post-fight as well. But I think, yeah, it's on the line for sure.
Are you leaning any certain direction? I have to tell you, to me, it was entirely dependent on the weight cut. I didn't know how I felt about it. Seeing it now, I just feel like the stats tell us, yes, Henry Cejudo is now entering the mature stage of his career, but TJ Dillashaw has been there a while. He's one of the best coached fighters. He's one of the most well-rounded fighters. He's one of the most active fighters in terms of what happens inside the cage. I'm going to lean a little Dillashaw. What about you?
Dude, this whole week I was picking Cejudo, and I was pretty comfortable in Cejudo because dropping the weight, I didn't think TJ Dillashaw was going to look good. But, man, at the open workouts, power, speed, energy, his spirits are good, which is the most important. And you talk about recovery. My question is, what recovery? Because it's not like we saw a diminished fighter stepping on the scale and looking all wobbly, looking to recover. TJ Dillashaw looked like he can put in rounds right after stepping off the scale. So I don't think there's much recovery to be done. I think we're getting maybe not on 100% TJ Dillashaw. I think we see that at bantamweight, but I think we're getting somewhere close to 90, 85, which is pretty good. And I think that'll be enough to beat Cejudo. It wouldn't surprise me if Cejudo picks up the win, but I'm leaning towards Dillashaw like you.
We've discussed how ESPN has treated the Greg Hardy issue. I don't really want to rehash it. Here's what I would like to get into. 264 on the scales. Kind of just barely made it, but he made it. Huge guy taking on Alan Crowder, who had a nice run on Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series. Not so great in his UFC debut, so this is a second chance co-main event. He kind of seems up for it. Look, here's the truth about Greg Hardy. When he's out there doing what he likes to do, come forward and just throw heavy bombs, he is athletic. He is nimble in the pocket. He's never gone to the second round. He's never gone to the fourth minute, I don't believe. There are so many unanswered questions. By far, Crowder is the most experienced. If Crowder can take him to the second round, who knows what could happen? This is kind of intriguing for me. Put all the domestic violence stuff aside. I know that's almost a horrible thing to say, but it is a fight. You do have to consider it on its own terms. Are you feeling the same way that I am about it, that if he can make it outside that initial blast, which is nuclear in its power, there's something to learn there?
No, yeah, for sure. He's an athlete, and we've seen tons of times before in the UFC. Athleticism fills the gap sometimes over experience, and more athletic guys that perhaps don't have as much experience go in there and beat the experienced guy. So from just an athletic standpoint, it is a very interesting fight. He's facing a vet, and we'll see how he does, but so far he's shown to us that he could be something big in the UFC.
What do you see in Crowder that could help him out and take the fight late? Because I don't think trading with Greg Hardy is going to be the best idea. I mean, maybe one never knows. It just seems, rationally speaking, taking the fight to the ground or dragging it out late, that's going to be his best bet. Are these things that you've seen in tape that give you confidence he can do?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, he's been watching him. Something that's good about prepping for a Greg Hardy fight is that he's not your typical 3-0 fighter. Like, his career has been very documented, because if you look at the early fights usually for fighters, like, you can't even find videos online about those. We know how Greg Hardy fights. So there's footage. There's a lot of footage of him out there. So there's that. And also, like, I feel like, I'm not saying this is the case, but I kind of feel like Greg Hardy's looking a bit past him. He's already talking about UFC title, the SUFA boxing title, if that ever, comes to fruition. And, there's also been a lot of controversy, as you mentioned, as well. So that's been clouding Greg Hardy a bit. And, I feel like Allen is just going to go in there. He's going to be the most relaxed guy in the arena.
Let me one question about Greg Hardy before we turn the page on this. What do you think he thinks about all the questions about this? I got to be honest. On one level, I'm sure sitting there at Media Day and having to answer for the fact you put your hands on women is probably not something that he enjoyed doing. Whether or not he should have, in terms of facing the media, is a different question. On another level, I'll be honest, I think he kind of likes it. I think he gets off on sticking his finger in people's chest, metaphorically speaking, or otherwise. And I kind of feel like motivating himself to dunk on the haters, as it were, is a real thing for him. Do you get that vibe?
Yeah, and he's doing this for himself. Like, he told me, he's like, yo, to be honest, I got greed. I want to do it all. I want to be the best heavyweight. I want to be the great American heavyweight. And, yeah, I mean, I feel like he's coming in there. He's, first of all, media trained. He's already been through these questions tons of times, over in his football career. So in a way, he's getting a lot of criticism, like, oh, he shouldn't be here. He shouldn't be on this card because of this, and that. And he's out there kind of with a chip on his shoulder, like, okay, we'll see. I'll prove to you that I belong here in the UFC.
And then it takes us down the card to the person that he's been connected with. It's been talked to death. We talked about the MMA Hour and the Beat and every other show. Rachel Ostovich is back in the UFC. She'll be taking on Paige Vanzant. Let's turn the page towards Paige Vanzant. We spent a ton of time talking about Rachel and the incredible Herculean task that she has in front of her to deal with all of these issues and then still fight in the octagon. Paige Vanzant, I actually think this is a good fight for her. Now, maybe I could be wrong about this. Chuck Mindenhall said on the Beat that he felt like she was distracted in terms of her life opportunities, which I agree with. On the other hand, Rachel Ostovich, if you can pressure her, and if there's anything that Paige Vanzant does, it's forward pressure, taking risks, getting in there. I do think it's a good fight for Paige Vanzant. And the question is, should she be her old scrappy self, or should she be a more calculated, grown fighter?
Man, that's a tough one, and we're going to figure that out, Saturday night. But, Rachel can scrap. Rachel can be scrappy as well, so I don't know if you want to meet fire with fire. I think it's something she's going to feel out. And also, she's changed camps. She's not training in Oregon, not anymore with Team Alpha Male in Sacramento. So she's also been out for a year, so I'm curious to see what kind of version we get. I feel like we're going to get a little bit of both, to be honest. I feel like that was her whole thing, figuring out, like, what version am I? Because she would either show up as her scrappy self or this very technical fighter that could sometimes be too careful. I think we're going to see a very measured fighter, a more matured fighter. She's older, but at the same time, I feel like we're going to see a little bit of that vintage Vanzant, scrappiness.
Yeah, my hunch is that you're going to see somebody who tries to think through it, and then when the big punches start landing, they might just revert back to what they both like to do. Although I will say, Ostovich, a little bit more of a grappler than Vanzant, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Do you think this is to borrow from pro wrestling, is this a bit of a loser leaves? Yeah, well, it's not a sport. It's they can call it what they want, not a sport. But you got Ostovich. She's kind of up and down in her career. She's all coming off of a win, but okay. And then you've got Vanzant. She's won one of her last 4. So I'm not saying that they're on the chopping block, but like if you can't beat the other person in these scenarios, it does raise some broader questions about how much longevity in this organization you can really have.
That's true. I see your point, and I do agree with it up to some degree, but I also think they have very strong brands. Like, if you look at them on social media, like, I think Vanzant's like 2 million on Instagram or something like that. That's worth something nowadays, right? And Ostovich is about like $500,000, so that's probably most UFC fighters. And there's a reason why they're on this card as well, on the first ESPN card. So, sure, yeah, I think a loss would hurt them wherever it goes, but I don't think it'll be the end of them. Also, flyweights division, women's flyweight division is still very new, so you still need fighters around. So I'm sure it will hurt to some degree, but I don't think it'll be a career-ending loss for either fighter.
Some other interesting fights on the card. Yancy Medeiros back down at lightweight. You know what he told me? That he was in control of his own diet. He just ate only when he was hungry. He didn't eat any other time. And I said, did you do that the last time you were at lightweight? He said, no. I said, how do you feel this time? He said he felt great. He made the weight, right? You saw him. So that'll be interesting to see how that works out against Gregor Gillespie, one of these enigmas in the sport, right? What is your read on that kind of fight? To me, that's an uphill climb for Yancy. He seems entirely game. Don't misunderstand me. That's a tough guy. But Gregor Gillespie is just this guy who emerges from the shadows of the swamp after fishing, beats up everybody, and then goes back to it.
Yeah, this was an interesting one. Not only because of their styles, but like character-wise, they're like very different people. But this is an interesting one because Gregor Gillespie, I feel like he's a fighter. Don't get me wrong, but in the sense of fighting, Yancy Medeiros has that. Like he'll go in there and he'll get cut up. Gregor Gillespie tries to keep things more technical. So I'm curious to see how he does against somebody that does down a push, that's down a grind. Because Gillespie's a wrestler too, so we know how tough he is. So this is an interesting one. I don't know how it's gonna go, but I'm excited for it.
All right, last but not least, the main event of the ESPN portion of the card. Remember, it starts on ESPN Plus, 4 fights on ESPN, then the entire main card will be on ESPN Plus. Donald Cerrone versus Alex Hernandez. I believe Alex Hernandez weighed in first, if I'm not mistaken, right? He looked phenomenal. How did Cerrone look? Because I know you were saying the cut was back down to lightweight, a little bit rough for him.
You know what? I think, as I said, like before on the broadcast of the live stream, I was saying, it's not easy. It's rough for sure. But he's a pro. He's done this so many times before. When he was stepping on the scale, it didn't feel like, oh my God, I'm dying. It just felt like this sucks, but I have to do it, and I've been here before. So I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think he's gonna be able to rehydrate and be in good spirits once the fight comes. I don't think the weight cut will affect him too much.
Ultimately, skills win fights, right? That's what matters in the end. And you've got a guy in Alex Hernandez who has big power but likes to wrestle. You got a guy in Donald Cerrone who has a particularly good guard. That's going to be an interesting matchup if it goes to the ground. Here's one thing I've noticed. I'm not suggesting that Cerrone's commitment to the fight has somehow been compromised. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is you hear this thing in wrestling all the time, who wants it more, who wants it more? At least from the outside looking in, for what it is worth, Hernandez appears to want this more than anything I've ever seen before. What is your read on that? Do you am I overstating things, or do you feel like there's this we call it determination, but to me it's a want of stature Cerrone seems a little more comfortable with?
That, and also think about this. Hernandez was supposed to fight Francisco Trinaldo, right? Francisco Trinaldo is a stud. I mean, that's one of the toughest guys you can face at 155, but beating him doesn't really get you much because, he doesn't have a huge name. Now he's getting Cowboy Cerrone, we know he's in an older stage. He still has a huge name. He's on the first ESPN card, on the first ESPN Plus card. No, actually, that'll be on ESPN, like the channel itself. So he just went all of a sudden from fighting a really tough guy with not that big of a name to still a tough guy with a big name on a big platform. So he understands this is a huge opportunity. And, I feel like he knows, like a win Hernandez beating Cerrone will be bigger for Hernandez than Cerrone beating Hernandez, for Cerrone. So he understands that, and he knows this is a big opportunity, and he feels like he's rising up to the occasion. For now.
And credit to Donald Cerrone for taking a fight like this against, very little. It's not that we don't respect Alex Hernandez. I think he's as tough as customer as they come, but what does it meaningfully do for you in the lightweight division to beat him right now? Probably not a ton.
That's about it, yep.
He's taking these fights over and over and over again. I take my hat off to him as a competitor. We had noted yesterday on the card, Jeff Neal taking on Bilal Muhammad. That was sort of my sleeper. Anything else on this card worth a mention?
Joseph Benavidez is fighting Dustin Ortiz. This is the second time they fight. Ortiz has improved a lot. I believe he's 3-0 since they fought. And this is a weird one because Joseph Benavidez made championship weight. So he's kind of been this player in the whole TJ Cejudo situation. And, I think whatever happens, he's kind of the next guy in line. So that's the one that I have my eye on. And it all depends on if he beats Dustin Ortiz. Because if he doesn't beat Dustin Ortiz and Cejudo keeps the title, you can't really give him a title shot, right? So this is a very important fight for him, and he's in a very tricky situation. So I have my eye on that. But, there's some great fights on the card.
Joanne Calderwood's on the card. By the way, back to Benavidez. I think Benavidez winning and Cejudo winning, let's say in dominant fashion, that would both be better for the flyweight division. Like if Benavidez loses but Cejudo wins, that could be a bit of an issue. But if all the quote-unquote right guys at the top of the division wins.
Right? Yeah, if the flyweights do their job on Saturday, all of a sudden you can have a pretty good fight because it's a rematch. Their first fight was controversial. Remember, there was a point deducted. So all of a sudden you have a bit of a storyline. So maybe it won't resurrect the flyweight division, but it can extend the life and at least give it another title fight.
So there you have it. And also, Dennis Bermudez, 4-fight losing streak, 3 of those by split decision. He's bumping up a weight class, so he has his back up against the wall. That'll be interesting to see how that goes. I'm looking forward, of course, to seeing on ESPN. But candidly, I'm a little bit more curious to see how it feels to watch the main card on this streaming service. I don't really have a lot of, anticipation in terms of what it will feel like, but I'm ready to get this whole thing started, right?
Yeah. Apart from the fights itself, I want to see how the product looks. Also, we've talked about the pacing of the fights, how unbearable it can be sometimes. I'm kind of keeping my fingers crossed, hoping, the pacing is a little better. In
the first, I do think the first event might not be the best indication of that. Yeah. Let's see how it moves forward.
But it still sets a precedent, right? And I want to see how the product looks. I think somebody asked Dana White, like, okay, what's different? They've messed around with the graphics packages and the animations, and that's always nice to get a fresh coat of paint on the product, right?
Fair enough. So don't go anywhere. MMA Fighting will have coverage for you all weekend long. There's nothing left but the fights. Well, the ceremonial wins, of course, have happened already, but the fights themselves, that's really just it. We have to watch the fights, and then we'll be there on Fight Night, keeping it covered. Don't go anywhere. MMAfighting.com. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel. We'll see you guys at MMA Hour on Monday, but we'll see you on Fight Night as well. Until then, enjoy the fights.